One of the hardest things about holding Bitcoin for the long term is getting through the dips. In this context, I'm talking about two different kinds of dips. Number one is the education dip, and number two is the price dips. Of course, you know exactly what the price dips are. Whenever Bitcoin's price comes down 10, 15%, the majority of people are going to panic, they're going to sell, they're going to give away their Bitcoin, and they're never going to get it back again. That's the price dip. I think that one is something that comes with experience. You learn about it over time, you figure it out, you realize that Bitcoin's price is going to regularly and routinely come down and go back up. It's going to fall and then it's going to rise again. It's going to fall, it's going to rise again. The price is fully determined based on the marginal buyer and seller. So the person who's buying any amount of Bitcoin at the current price or selling Bitcoin at whatever price, it depends on them. So if there are more sellers than buyers, the price will come down. If there are more buyers than sellers, the price will go up. If there's more Bitcoin available to be bought, demand is being fulfilled and sellers have to decrease their prices in order to have their Bitcoin purchased. This is what happens during bear markets. Over time, you see the price drops and drops and drops because retail, anybody who's trying to gamble on Bitcoin, they all run out of cash. There's nobody else willing to buy Bitcoin, nobody else willing to use leverage to buy Bitcoin. Nobody's willing to do that. So they run out of cash and the price drops and drops and drops. So you have to go through those dips for the price where the price is going to fall. You have to either stick it out, maybe buy more while the price is dropping. When the price is down 20, 30%, buy more, or just hold on. The majority of people aren't going to do this. They're not going to hold on. What they're going to do is they're going to sell. They're going to sell early and they're going to miss out on the biggest opportunity that they're ever going to see in their lifetime. So when Bitcoin's price goes from 109,000 to 78,000, they're going to sell and then they're not going to buy back until Bitcoin goes back to 120, 130, $150,000. In my opinion, the second dip, the education dip, is a lot more difficult to get through because there's no replacement for the education that comes along with Bitcoin. If you're going to listen to Bitcoin podcasts, if you're going to read Bitcoin related emails, any kind of content, absorb any kind of content related to Bitcoin, that can't be replaced by education in other markets. So let's say for me, for example, I did these CFA exams. I have a background in finance and accounting. I worked in the finance industry for almost 10 years. And yet, in my entire career, in the entire time that I was learning about the financial system, I hadn't come across most of the stuff that I learned after I started learning about Bitcoin. Let me repeat that. So, most of the things that I learned after I started studying Bitcoin were new to me, even though I had a pretty deep background with finance and accounting and the entire financial system and how it works. The information that you get from the books that people have written when they've studied Bitcoin for years, some people have studied Bitcoin for over a decade and they write books. The book behind me there, The Internet of Money, great book written by Andreas Antonopoulos. People have studied Bitcoin for so long, and what they're doing is they're putting the information that they've learned into a written format. So you can go ahead and read all of their thoughts. You can avoid the mistakes that they made, and you can see where this is going. But you have to do the work. You have to put in the work to understand what Bitcoin is. You have to put in the work to see where Bitcoin could go. You have to learn about history. You have to learn about psychology. You have to learn about all these different topics in order to figure out where Bitcoin is going in the future. For example, if you don't understand economics, you're not going to understand how the price discovery happens, how Bitcoin's price is set. You're going to think that it's all random, it's going up and down, it's doing its own thing, it's not based on any kind of trends. You're not going to think of it that way. If you don't have an economics background, you're not going to see it that way. You're just going to see it as a random number that's floating up and then falling back down. You also won't understand how the economy works. You won't understand how Bitcoin fixes the financial system. With the current financial system, we have a form of money that can be created out of nothing. With Bitcoin, we have a form of money that can't be created out of nothing. It takes work, time, effort, energy to create more Bitcoin. There's a limited number of Bitcoin that can exist, while there's an unlimited number of fiat currencies or units of any fiat currency that can exist. And I found this graphic, which I think perfectly shows you what I'm talking about here. So this is called the Dunning-Kruger effect. We have confidence on the y-axis from 0 to 100%. Then we have experience on the x-axis from 0 to 100%. The Dunning-Kruger effect is basically a way to show you that you start off with zero confidence because you have no idea what something is. You go to 100% confidence with no experience. And at this point, you've just started on your journey of learning about something. You don't know what you don't know. Then you start digging a little deeper. You start figuring out that whatever you're looking at is a little bit trickier than you had thought. So we can see here, wait, this is tricky. Then you move on, you keep learning. You try to get through the difficult parts, you try to get through the boring parts. You have to build that foundation by learning the boring stuff because if you don't, you're going to make a fool of yourself. A lot of people on YouTube are making complete fools of themselves because they're at this stage here where they have zero experience and 100% confidence. They're telling you that Bitcoin isn't worth anything because it doesn't have cash flows. Bitcoin is a terrible investment. They're telling you that they could put their shit in a bag and replace Bitcoin with it because their shit in a bag would be scarce. And in 10, 15, 20 years, these people are going to realize how stupid they sound because they're going to be forced to do the research. All of their clients are going to be telling them to study Bitcoin. All of the people around them are going to be telling them to study Bitcoin. These are financial professionals who haven't done the research, but they think they know everything. So at some point, you do more research, you try to get through the dip. So at the bottom of this little curve, you say, I'll never get this. And eventually you give up. You don't give up on the entire idea of whatever you're learning. You give up on learning everything. You give up on trying to figure out every single aspect of Bitcoin. You give up on trying to figure out every single question you have before you buy any. You understand that this is a lot more complicated than you thought to begin with. You finally realize that this isn't something that you'll understand overnight. And when people say stupid things like gold is better than Bitcoin, all you can tell them is to study Bitcoin. The price dip is a little easier to navigate. All you do is you don't sell. You keep buying whenever you can and you just hold. That's it. On the other hand, with the education dip, you have no idea what you might be missing. You don't know which topics you haven't put in the time to learn about yet. So, for example, I didn't completely understand the difficulty adjustment until maybe a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. I had started studying Bitcoin about 4 years ago. I also didn't understand mining as well as I do today until maybe 6 months ago. So over time, you're going to keep learning more, you're going to keep compounding your knowledge, and you're going to become more and more convicted in what you've learned and the decision that you've made to buy Bitcoin and to hold Bitcoin. One thing that really helped me get through the education dip was navigating through this website. This website is called mempool.space. When I went through this website, it kind of gave me a clearer picture of what people mean by, oh, this is uncensorable. This is something that's decentralized. This is something that can't be stopped. What you see here is every single transaction that's ever happened on the Bitcoin blockchain. The Bitcoin blockchain is just a ledger of transactions of Bitcoin moving from one address to another, and all of those transactions are recorded on the ledger. So this is the ledger here. This is called a blockchain explorer. This blockchain is a chain of blocks that contain information about transactions on the Bitcoin network. Once you wrap your head around this, it all starts making sense. So let me go back to the very first block. The first block is called block 0. It's the Genesis block. If we go to block 0, we see here Genesis. We can see exactly how every single Bitcoin was created. So we can see here in the very first block on January 3rd, 2009, 50 Bitcoin were created and added to this address right here. If we go to this address, we can see that the Bitcoin is still there. One thing that's really interesting here is that the Bitcoin is still there, even though it's worth something like $5 million. But at the time when this Bitcoin was first mined, when it was first created, it was worth nothing. It had a zero value. For something like the first year and a half, maybe 2 years, Bitcoin was worth nothing. And I thought this was something interesting. If you go to block 68,952, you can see that the 50 Bitcoin is worth $4.29. There's also a transaction fee in this block. If you go to the block right before, Bitcoin was worth nothing. So the same Bitcoin at this point was worth zero. So maybe at this point there was no price for Bitcoin. Maybe the price was determined here. But if we go to block 100,000, we can see that the price of Bitcoin, the price of this block reward was $13.15. So it went from 0 to 13.15. If we go to block 200,000, we can see that the block subsidy plus the fees for transacting in Bitcoin were worth $601. So the people who were contributing their time, energy, and resources to this network to create this Bitcoin were getting paid the same amount of Bitcoin, but it was worth more. The way that Bitcoin supply is capped at 21 million is every 210,000 blocks, there's a halving. So we can see here, this block is in gold. If we go to the block that's right before the one that's in gold, 210,000, we can go to 209,000. We can see that the total fees are 0.536 Bitcoin. The subsidy plus fee is 50.536 Bitcoin. What's happening here is that the subsidy is paid as a minimum amount for contributing time, energy, and resources to the Bitcoin network. So you get 50 Bitcoin plus the fee. So in this case, the block subsidy was 50 Bitcoin. If we go to the very next block, block 210,000, you can see that the subsidy plus fee dropped to 38.563 Bitcoin. The total fees were 13.563 Bitcoin. So the total subsidy was 25 Bitcoin. What's happening here is over time, the amount of Bitcoin that the people who offer their time, energy, resources to the Bitcoin network to mine Bitcoin or to create Bitcoin using specialized computers by contributing their energy to the network, those people are getting paid less nominally in terms of Bitcoin. But the value of the reward that they're getting is increasing. So we saw in the previous block 200,000, the subsidy plus fee was worth $600 or so. In this one, the subsidy plus fee has dropped, but it's worth $481. Now let's go to block 300,000. So if we go to block 300,000, we can see the block subsidy plus fee is worth $11,155. So this reward, the subsidy plus fee, went from being $13 in block 100,000, 50 Bitcoin, to $600 in block 200,000 to $11,155 at block 300,000. If you go to block 400,000, you can see 10,655. And then again, at every 210,000 blocks, there's a halving. So we can go to 420,000. The reward goes from 25 Bitcoin to 12.5 Bitcoin. So it halved. It decreased by 50%. So the minimum reward that the miners got decreases by 50%. So now they're left with 13.076 Bitcoin, including fees. The reason why I'm showing you this is that this rule is set by all of the people who are running the Bitcoin network. Nobody can change this. Nobody can stop this. Nobody can increase the supply of Bitcoin. Nobody can make it so that the supply cap changes from the current 21 million to, let's say, 50 million or 100 million. Nobody can change that. These are things that you need to understand in order to get through the Bitcoin dip. You have to understand that no matter what, the amount of Bitcoin being produced is decreasing by 50% every 4 years, and that the amount of Bitcoin that's being handed out to these people who are mining Bitcoin, if we go to the most recent block, we can see that the reward is worth $265,000. But the subsidy plus fee has dropped to 3.149 Bitcoin. So the nominal number is decreasing, but the market value is increasing. What's happening here is more and more people are willing to dedicate their time, energy, and resources to Bitcoin. They're figuring out what Bitcoin is, and they're willing to offer their energy to the network. This isn't part of the mempool.space website, of course. I made a spreadsheet explaining to you with the numbers about what's happening with the supply there. So you can see here, the block subsidy is the amount of money that's being given to the miners. Over time, that's the fixed amount of money. Over time, that's decreasing by 50% every 4 years. Right now, it's at 3.125 Bitcoin. Every 210,000 blocks, the block subsidy decreases. So we're seeing here that by block 6,930,000, the block subsidy will have halved and halved and halved until it's zero. So at this point, all of the Bitcoin has been created, all of it has been given to miners. Miners do whatever they want with it, they sell it, they keep it, they can do whatever they want. But the total amount of Bitcoin that will ever be available, based on the block subsidy decreasing every 4 years, and every 4 years, every 210,000 blocks, a certain amount of Bitcoin being created. So in first the first 4 year period, the first before the first halving, 10,500,000 Bitcoin will be created. After the second 4 year, second 4 year period, 15.75 million Bitcoin were created, then 18.375. By April 19th, 2024, there were 19.687 million Bitcoin. And by some point in 2028, 20.343 million Bitcoin will have been created. So right now, 94% of the supply has been created and added to the economy. So there's only about 6% of the Bitcoin left to be created. So over the next 120 years until 2140, there's only going to be about 1.3 million new Bitcoin created. To ensure that this schedule is kept, to ensure that by 2140, all of the Bitcoin is mined and it doesn't happen too soon before that. It could happen, let's say, in 2139, it could happen in 2138, but it won't happen, let's say, in the year 2050. The creator of the network added a special feature to the network to ensure that this schedule doesn't get disrupted. And what the network does is it makes sure that these blocks in this blockchain are separated by about 10 minutes. To make sure that this happens, there's a difficulty adjustment. There's a certain amount of difficulty in the data that you have to process to create a block in Bitcoin. I'm not going to go through the details, but let's say, for example, a lot of computers start contributing their time, energy, and resources to the network. What's going to happen is the blocks are going to be created quicker, and there's a difficulty adjustment to make sure that this number here, the average block time, remains around 10. So if it drops too much at some point, there's going to be a difficulty adjustment up. So it's going to get more difficult to mine Bitcoin. If this goes to above 10 minutes, let's say it goes to 11 minutes, this difficulty is going to decrease and there's going to be a negative difficulty adjustment. So like I said, go to that website, mempool.space, try to navigate the website, try to go through it and see what you learn. I think you're going to learn a lot. That was one of the final things that I did before I truly understood what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is a ledger that allows anyone to send value to anyone else across the world. Everybody on earth can have access to the record on that ledger. In the current system, it's completely different. Everything is hidden, everything is behind closed doors. There's no transparency at all in the current financial system, while Bitcoin is completely transparent. So, back to the original point of this video, I think getting through the two dips is the most difficult part of Bitcoin. So, number one, the price dips, making sure that you can actually hold while the price falls. And number two, the education dip. Make sure you can keep studying when things get hard, when things get boring, when nobody else is doing the same thing as you. You have to get through it. If you don't get through it, you're not going to succeed with Bitcoin. So get through the dip, whether it's a drop in price by 15, 20, 30%, or the education gets really boring and you can't get through the difficult parts of learning how Bitcoin works. I think putting in the effort to educate yourself on how Bitcoin works will probably be one of the best uses of your time, because once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. Once you have the knowledge, nobody can take it away from you. Once you understand where Bitcoin can go, you're always, always, always going to want more. For me, the education dip was a lot more difficult to get through because I had spent so much time learning about the legacy financial system, and it basically questioned everything that I knew about money, everything that I knew about finance, everything that I knew about investing. It made me question everything. It took me thousands of hours and 3 years to actually wrap my head around what Bitcoin is. But there are other people who don't have a finance background who were able to get it done in 6 months, maybe a year. So, for all we know, not having a finance background may actually be better for you when it comes to understanding how Bitcoin works. The most difficult part, of course, is the bottom here, the I'll never get this part. Once you get through this, you're free and clear. It may take you a few reads of a book, may take you a few Michael Saylor podcasts, whatever it is, make sure you get through it. I created a community with weekly live sessions and a lot of extra content. So if you need support in getting through the dip, you can join the community. It's going to be the first link in the description below. I promise you that once you get through that education or the price dip, putting more money into Bitcoin is going to get a lot easier. You're going to be able to sleep a lot better at night. You're going to know that your money is actually safe instead of in the current financial system where it's being gambled with and it's being used to fund random projects that are hurting us and destroying our lives. The easiest way to do this is to study Bitcoin, buy Bitcoin, and just chill.